Welcome to another meeting of the Midwest Independent Publishers Association. I'm Paul Druckman. Our program today is called On the Radio, and with us are two very special guest speakers. Mr. Charlie Boone, longtime radio personality on WCCO Radio, and Miss Sue Fraze, who's been a producer at WCCO Radio for several years. They will tell us through experience and stories about how book publishers bring their story about their books to the listening audience. Before we begin that tonight, we have a reading from the book The Little Bighorn, written by Robert Nightingale. And to read for us tonight, the publisher of Far West Publishing, Mr. Ed Zimmerman.
This is the testimony of a private by the name of Golden, who advanced and then engaged in some healthy correspondence in later years with a colonel who had been Custer's third in command, Captain Benteen. Soon after the pack train, which was led, by the way, by Captain Benteen, who came up from the rear to Reno Hill, about 2 miles from where Custer was fighting the Indians. Soon after the pack train arrived, I walked over toward the edge of the bluffs with Lieutenant Wallace trying to point out to him the location of the body of Lieutenant McIntosh. Near where we were standing, quite a group of officers had gathered and stood looking down into the valley, talking earnestly together. Just who made up this party, I am not certain. But as I now recall it, Major Reno, Captain French, Captain Weir, Captain McDougal, and possibly some of the officers were in the group. While Lieutenant Wallace and I were still talking, Captain Weir hastily left the group, and as he passed us, I heard him say something like, "By God, if you don't go, I will. And if we live to get out of here, somebody shall know of this." To whom he addressed his remarks, or the particular occasion for them, I never heard, as I never heard of the matter mentioned after that. A few moments after this, I saw Captain Weir mount his horse and move rapidly down the river toward a high bluff that hid our view of the valley to the northward, followed by Lieutenant Edgerly with D Troop. This move on the part of Captain Weir was, as I afterwards learned, unauthorized by his battalion commander, and came very near costing us the lives of Lieutenant Edgerly and the whole troop. Just as soon as this move came to the knowledge of Captain Benteen, he mounted the 2 remaining troops of his battalion and, accompanied by Captain French with M Troop and detachments from other troops of the command, moved out toward the high point of bluffs, behind which Captain Weir and his troop had already disappeared. After Captain Benteen and his command moved out, Major Reno had his trumpeter repeatedly sound the halt. And that's what happened to Custer.
Ed, thank you. Tonight's program is titled Interview Techniques, The View from the Other Side. And the other side for us tonight is radio. And with us we have 2 people who know more about radio than any of us for sure, and most people everywhere in the world would know. Charlie Boone has spent many years in radio. I've promised not to say how many.
You can say how many.
How many is it? 1959 you started with CCO.
No, yeah.
Were you in radio before that?
Oh, yes.
So how many years is it, Charlie?
Almost 50.
Almost 50 years. That's tremendous.
Going back to the Air Force and Armed Forces Radio.
Throughout that time that Charlie's been with CCO, he's been a friend to publishers. In fact, he was introduced to me by Donna Montgomery, who told me some wonderful stories of how being interviewed by Charlie, and more than just the interview that was an opportunity, but the encouragement, the suggestions, the helpfulness, and really is a friend to book publishers. With him tonight is Sue Fraze. Sue has been the producer for CCO radio programs for 7 years? 15 years. And not just Charlie's show, but I understand all of the CCO radio shows. She recently left CCO, and she may take a few moments to tell us about that. But tonight they're both here to share with us insights into interview techniques, how to prepare both for the interview, what types of things to expect, also in terms of getting noticed in your press releases that you might be considered for an interview. And so please welcome our speakers tonight, Charlie Boone and Sue Fraze.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Yeah, books have been an important part of my life since I was a kid, I guess. My father was a minister, and we didn't have very much. He was a small-town minister, small churches, small towns, and very little money, especially during the Depression years. But Dad always had plenty of books. He had library of books overflowing with books. And so books were always an important part of my life. And I think one of the things that attracted me to my wife, almost 20 years married, is because of her love for books. And when we go on a driving trip, one of the things we love to do, not only search out historic spots, but to search for bookstores, hidden bookstores in little towns that you might not expect, and that's always been a pleasure. But in fact, I didn't meet my wife on a book interview, but I did meet her on an interview, and that's what I have in common with Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck is my wife's favorite actor. And if I have any person that I have well, he is an important person, my wife's. If he's on a movie, she watches it. And so a little over a year ago, he came to town. And so I got tickets from my wife and her sister to go and see Gregory Peck. And I had a call from the theater the day before, and they said, gee, we got to have somebody introduce Gregory Peck. Would you do it? And I said, I'd be delighted. So I went down to the theater that afternoon, and they wanted to check the mics and check the lighting and so on. So I met Gregory Peck, and he's a charming man, tall, thin, kind of frail-looking compared to the Gregory Peck of 12 O'Clock High, and but a most charming man. And so we checked the mic, and I did a little ad-lib off the top of the head introduction, and he clapped behind backstage, which first time I've ever been applauded by Gregory Peck. And so I introduced him that night, and I told him that my wife was madly in love with him, and that she had to meet him. And he said, bring her backstage, by all means. So I did, and they had a chance to meet in the dressing room. And so he told me the story about how he met his wife. And his wife became his wife. She was a journalist for a French newspaper, and he was just coming from Rome after filming Roman Holiday. And so he stopped in Paris on his way to Germany to film Judgment at Nuremberg. And so a Parisian newspaper, wanted to do an interview, and the young woman that they sent out to interview him asked him all kinds of questions, but didn't use a notepad, took no notes, did not apparently have a tape recorder unless it was hidden on her person. And yet when he saw the article, the interview, it was verbatim almost. It was perfect, and he was just amazed by that. And he never forgot her. Not only the fact that she was attractive, but the fact that she was so bright and such an incredible reporter. So when he was on his way back from Germany, coming through Paris again, he stopped over, and he thought, I have no one to go to lunch with. I'm going to call that reporter. She was so interesting. So he called the newspaper, and he got the newspaper room where she was a reporter. And he said, this is Gregory Peck. I want to talk to Mademoiselle, whatever her name was. And I can't remember. And so he remembered, which is important. And so all of a sudden there was a hush in the newsroom, silence. And then he heard this clip-clop of heels coming up to the phone. And she said, yes. And he said, this is Gregory Peck. Remember a few months back you interviewed me for your newspaper? She says, yes, I remember. And he said, well, I'm in town just today. And he said, I wonder if you'd have lunch with me. Silence, no response. Hello, did you hear me? I'd like to take you to lunch. Could you go to lunch with me? Silence, no response. Finally, the third time he said, are you there? Yes. Would you go to lunch with me? Finally, she said, yes. He didn't ask her why she, the big pause until much later when they were married. And he said, by the way, he said, I've been thinking about this. When I asked you for that date for lunch in Paris at work, you paused, big long pause after 3 times I had to ask you. She said, well, I'll tell you. She said, I had been assigned to do an interview with, at the home of Jean-Paul Sartre in Paris, and to interview Dr. Albert Schweitzer. And she said it was quite a decision. And he said, you made the right choice. So, like Gregory Peck, I met my wife in an interview on WCCO almost 20 years ago. So I have that in common with Gregory Peck. But books have been a major part of my life, and one of the great pleasures I've had at CCO throughout those years was doing interviews with authors and having a nice collection of autographed first editions from famous people, and that's always fun, and from people not so famous, but most interesting. In fact, some of the most interesting interviews came from people that are not extraordinarily famous, but one of the most satisfying interviews happened in 1992. Deborah Fraser, a children's book, best-selling children's book, called On the Day You Were Born. Brian Baxter, who's a bookseller in downtown Minneapolis, Baxter Books, brought the book over and said, I got to read this book. He gets real excited, especially about children's books. So he read this book, and it's a very small prose, short. So I read the book, and I was impressed, and I said, boy, I'd like to meet that author. She's an artist and a writer, and she had a very difficult pregnancy, awaiting her first child. She was confined to bed most of the time, and she was in her parents' home in Vero Beach, Florida, looking at the sky and the sea, and thinking about welcoming this child, and thinking about all the things that were happening in the world, all the animals and all the things of nature that were happening, welcoming her child to be born. So she wrote this lovely book, and she read it on the air with me, and I was so impressed. I was part of a commissioning club, 6 couples, including my wife and I, take our money and pool it and try to hire Minnesota composers to compose music. And so this was our first project, and I thought this would make a marvelous piece of music, either a choral piece or a symphony with a narrator. And so we sought a composer, and we found one in Steve Heitzig, a farm boy from Keister, Minnesota. And so he wrote a symphony in collaboration with Deborah Fraser, and it received its world premiere by the Minnesota Orchestra last fall, just a year ago. And Jane Alexander, the actress, came in and narrated it. And so the orchestra got so excited about it. They weren't excited when we were trying to pitch it at first, but they got excited. And now they produced a videotape, which has just come out. And so I've watched Deborah go through this has been some years now, through all these changes and all these challenges for Deborah, not only to become a narrator and to become a salesman for her book and watch her art direct this videotape. That has been a most memorable experience in getting to know her. She's a marvelous young woman, a magic lady. And so books are very important to me. And so we'll try to answer some questions. I brought Sue along because Sue is the most important part of this duo tonight. She has been the most productive, best resource at WCCO. We're going to miss her. She's leaving to form her own company, her own, well, she can tell you about that, whatever. And if there's a question we need to ask Boone and Erickson or anyone else at WCCO, ask Sue, she'll know. And Sue has produced our show in the past. She has produced almost every show that's been on the air. And she knows the questions or the answers to the questions I'm sure you have. I would just say briefly that book guests, if they're topical, timeliness is of importance. The quality of the person that's going to be on the air, sometimes the book is less important than the person. If the person is a great personality and comes through on the radio, they can sometimes enhance a book more than an author who has a great book but can't talk. Alvin Toffler, Future Shock, he has many books. I don't know what was happening in his life, but I remember the last time I interviewed him, and yet I heard him just recently and he sounded okay. But he had a very difficult time in talking. It was almost like I was finishing every sentence he began because he had a difficult speech pattern. And so this marvelous book was difficult to get across. I'm sure the people on the other side of the radio were dying. So I was. So sometimes the most entertaining guest can sell a mediocre book. Sometimes a great book is lost because the guest doesn't project, on the radio at least. And I've always tried to, in welcoming guests on the show, they are a guest in my home, so to speak. And I've always tried to, I haven't tried to confront them and to be a provocateur. I've tried to read their book, if at all possible, unlike Larry King, who says he never reads the book. Because many times I've been fooled and I maybe got a book too late to read, It was handed to me when the person came in the room. And then I look at the book and read it afterwards, and I say, oh, my goodness, I wish I'd seen that book because there was a part in there I wanted to ask him about. It would have been a great thing for air. So I think it's important to read the book, but that's my opinion. And so timeliness, and sometimes if there's something happening in the world, news, and you think, boy, that book, they should be talking about that book, call the news media or whoever would have you on the air, because that would obviously be a timely subject. So I want to introduce Sue Fraze, who is a great producer, a most resourceful, and one of the most productive people I have ever met. She can do more work in the shortest period of time than anybody I know. I don't know if it's because she types fast or what.
That's what a producer is supposed
She
to do.
turns it out, I'll tell you. She is fantastic. And I have great respect for Sue, and Sue Fraze, ladies and gentlemen, give her a hand.
You know, I think I'm like most women. All the women can relate. You have to do at least two things at once, and it's always that way at CCO Radio. Now, to explain, because it's been referred to twice now. 2 weeks ago, I left WCCO Radio, and after 15 years at the station, and I have produced every show at WCCO Radio. Started out as the Boone and Erickson show producer, which was absolutely thrilling to me. I could not believe when I was hired that, good grief, these two guys that used to close my school in Ogilvy, I was going to be producing for them. This was just a thrill of a lifetime. And went on to work with all of the rest of the wonderful people at CCO and really enjoyed my time there. I'm part of the corporate world, the downsizing world. Westinghouse took us over, and they're shrinking the forces at WCCO Radio, and so I'm one of the people that decided to take the buyout, shrink wrap type of thing, and so I'm gone. There's a lot of people that are going to be leaving at the station. I chose to because I figured 15 years is a good time to be at the station. It's longer than I've been in any other job. And before that, I used to do publicity. And so coming up, I hope now in the future, I'll be able to combine the publicity part of my years ago training and the radio part. And so I'm going to be doing some publicity, and then the love of my life, which is outdoors, and work in that area, do some publicity for outdoor-related products and ventures and things like that. As I see Sybil Smith over there, I've gone to many Governor's fishing openers with her. And then the radio syndication I'm putting together along with Dan Hertzgaard, who has also left CCO Radio. Anyone that listens to the station knows that name also. And we're working on some syndicated radio shows. So all of those things I'm working and trying to get together. The publicity venture will be my first venture as I go along. And I figure when I was in the PR world, I was the person, like many of you, that would call up the radio producer or TV producer or print reporter and say, oh, have I got a guest for you? This is just great. And I think now, working on the other side, that I've got a whole other perspective. I can understand now with this airhead calling up, boy, have I got a guess for you, of how time-consuming that was as being on the other side. There are many things that the producers at CCO Radio, and I know by just talking to other producers, enjoy having. The fax machine is one of the greatest things that's ever happened in this whole world. Getting faxed background sheets and cover letters is very, very, very good to the producer. I should probably back up. First of all, you've got to know your market. You've got to know who there is nothing more irritating than wasting the time or wasting the fax paper or wasting these stamps and sending all of these things, no matter how you do it. And those people, it doesn't apply to the people that you're sending it to, or those people are gone. So know your station, know your TV, know your radio, know your print media. You need to know who you're selling your product to. so to speak. I mean, you wouldn't just go, up to a house if you're a door-to-door salesman and knock, knock, knock and say, I'm going to sell you some fishing lures, and you're in the middle of the desert. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You got to know your market. And so listen to, even if it's just a little bit, listen to the radio station, get some gist of what kind of radio station it is. Sometimes you can even find a sympathetic soul on the inside of the radio or TV station or the print media that will spend some time with you to explain maybe some people that have special interests in certain areas. But if you just take a week, or even a couple of days if you can, and listen to a station and get the gist of what it's all about, then at least you can refer to someone on the air and you're a little more knowledgeable and you're not going to be wasting so much time. But things in writing, it's always, if you're on deadline, send it through on the fax or even hand deliver. Otherwise, mail it and mail a copy of your book. I can't tell you how many times I've received the pitch letter and the backgrounder, which is very, very good. You don't have to overwhelm people either. Just give me the meat of it. And no book. Well, it's pretty hard to make the decision. I don't care how good the letter and the backgrounder is. You still want to have that book in your hands and look through that and get a feel for it. Those are just some of the basic things. Then follow up with a phone call. Know the timeline of the person that you're calling. I've had a number of people that have called me minutes before I'm due to go into the studio. Now, if they were aware at all of what show I was producing, they know that the last one I was producing was the Good Morning Show, the early morning, that they're not going to call me at 5 minutes to 5 in the morning, hoping to catch me before I go into the studio, because I'm just running into the studio. My mind is distracted, so don't call right before their deadline. Or if you do call, at least say, are you busy right now, or is there a better time to call? I think we're going to take questions, because I'm sure that'll be a better thing. But I noticed that I'm seeing name tags around the room. The thing about radio is that you very seldom meet people. We get people into the studio, but we do so many phone interviews that I'm spotting name tags of people that I know. And this is just really funny, because I know you from being a guest on the air, but duct tape book, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, I recognize the name tag. This is funny.
Sue was talking about sending information, and sometimes people send too much information. You're overloaded, and you have sheet after sheet after sheet, and you don't know where to start. And I talked with some of the producers and some of the people on the air at CCO, and they all agreed, concise. In fact, the less information, the better. If it's all pertinent and all as concise as possible.
A cover letter and just a good background sheet. That's the best. And we don't really care about what other critics and things have said. I can't tell you how many times we get that little quote thing, 2 or 3 sheets of paper that so-and-so from the St. Paul Pioneer Press said this, or Charlie Boone from WCCO Radio said this. As a producer, I don't really care what the other people have said. I just want the meat and potatoes of what the book is about and what the issue and how it will pertain to, if you're going to talk radio, which seems to be, the hottest thing lately, we're so issue and topic oriented that, as Charlie had mentioned, try to key into a subject of the day or something that's topical or an issue or something in the headlines. Some of the best interviews that come about where people have just called and said, you've heard about da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I happen to have a book that addresses that issue. And great, an expert, a guest expert. We're always looking for that. And sometimes you might even want to, some of the things that people have done is to send Rolodex cards with whatever you're an expert in as a heading on the Rolodex card. And then their name and their phone number and how to reach them. And make sure you leave, I know it's probably a pain, but we don't abuse it. We're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We need to be able to reach you other than 9 to 5. So a home number, or a pager, or a fax, or something, so we can reach you outside of those business hours. Because as Charlie knows now, on Saturday mornings, all of a sudden something happens, you gotta
Sure.
reach someone.
Mhm.
Well, the office number doesn't work, so,
If you have a cell phone, right.
mm-hmm, right.
You mentioned about validity of critiques. I talked with one personality at CCO, and he said, well, he always checks the New York Times book review, and if it's got a good review, he wants to, that has a lot to do with how impressed he might be about doing the interview. So some people are impressed with critiques, write-ups in the paper and the book section. Some are not. So,
I think, yeah, a full-blown review,
yeah.
I would be, but we get
the
a
little
lot of,
quotes?
yeah,
Oh, that doesn't
you know,
mean
like they
anything,
do
no.
in the ads in the paper. You know,
Yeah.
how they have, one line. Oh, you know,
Yeah,
that, taken
I
out of
agree. I'll
context,
agree
I
with
don't
that.
even know where
Yeah.
that came from.
John, you mentioned that sometimes a person's personality plays more than even the book.
Many
Now,
times.
if you get a package in the mail with information about the book and about the author, what do you do next to find out whether that's going to be a good personality to have on the air?
Well, that's a question for the producer, because she's the first one that comes in contact.
Yeah, we would place the call, and hopefully we can talk to the guest. We can talk to the author. In this market, it's very good and very reachable and touchable, and we can do that. Sometimes nationally, it isn't as easy to talk to those people, but I usually ask that we can, unless I can really get a high recommendation, or sometimes after a time, you get to trust the PR people that you're dealing with, or the publishers that you're dealing with, and you know that they're not going to sell you a bill of goods because they're going to have to deal with you the next time around on another author, and so they're not going to burn you. But I like to talk to the guest, and I will brief the guest on the host and the topics and the issues that we want to talk about. There's work on both sides. The talent, the host, has to do the homework and preparing of reading the book and reading the background material and preparing questions, but the guest has to prepare also. You have to be objective, and it's always very helpful if you can find 2 or 3 people that you trust that would be honest with you, and to talk about speech patterns, personality, stories that you could tell from your book, and have them be honest. Now, do I sound interesting? Should I speed my speech pattern up? One thing that people don't do, and they should do, especially on radio, TV, so visual. You can see the faces. You can relate to the faces. Radio, you can't. All you have is that voice. The voice quality is so important, and your inflections are so important. So that's something that you really need to be aware of. I mean, even sit down in front of a tape recorder and try to be your own critic. Listen to it objectively, and smile. I mean, if it's that kind of book, you're not going to death and dying. I don't know if you want to smile, but if it's a funny book or if it's a nice book, smile when you talk, because it comes across on the air, on the radio. It really does. And you've heard the term talking sound bites. Well, that is true, because radio is so commercial, other than public, but all the other stations, that you need to have quick, short, bullet items, little hot things that you can pull from your book, that you can share on the air, that you want to sell books. That's your goal. So pick out the best things, the most attractive things from your book that would make people want to run right out to the bookstore and buy it.
And you might have to put this together in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Television has very little time. And the other day it was demonstrated, Deborah, they introduced her videotape on the day you were born on NBC's Today Show. And I never watch morning television, but I was forced to watch it last Friday morning. And I had to watch through this minutia of stuff, and I thought, it gave me a good idea of what morning television is all about. They had 4 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. They showed the tape. And so you get very little time. But on radio, you might get 5 minutes. You might have to present your whole, sell somebody on the book in 5 minutes. You might get an hour. Many times we'll judge a guest. If the guest is really cooking, we'll let it go twice as long as we had originally anticipated, many times, right?
Yep.
And sometimes I've had guests where
They've been booked for an hour and they spent
and they
5
cut them off.
minutes.
Yeah, that
Thank you
actually
so
has
much.
happened.
Bye.
Yeah, that's happened. So if you're there a long time, you know you're doing a good job.
Yeah, that's right.
You indicated for a moment about being contacted by public relations agencies. In this industry, we see a lot of that. A lot of the PR people come to us as publishers, encouraging us to use them to reach you. Do you give that any greater consideration than you do a publisher coming directly to you?
No, unless it was someone that I had worked with for a long time and that I trusted. You know, there were certain people in town that I feel good about. I know they're not going to sell me a bill of goods and they're going to be very honest. But no, it's how it's all presented to me. Good grief, we get 75 phone calls a day, and letters and faxes you can't believe that we have to wade through. So, you know, it's finding it's like creating a resume. You know, how many different ways have people told you to put your resume together to catch the eye, you know, to get that job? It's the same type of thing. What do you put together? You got to get me in that first paragraph of whatever it is. That if it's a letter or the background or, you know, the cover of the book or whatever you say to me on the phone, because it's just such a quick business, and it's a selling business.
Do you think that hearing from the publisher, it has more credence than a PR agent?
No,
No?
I would. It would be equal.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
The sound media, there'd be any advantage in sending you a tape?
Wouldn't have time to listen to it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so crunched. That's one of the problems. We just don't have the time we want, which I'm glorying in now with all of I packed everything up and able to take it home, and all of my books I've been putting. I mean, Charlie knew what my office was like. 15 years of just I had a little pathway in my office. That was it, and I had to pack it all up and take it all home. And now I'm putting all of my books up at the bookshelf, and I think, oh look, you know, and I'm just going crazy, and I'm able to sit down and actually spend an hour reading.
And it brings back memories of that particular interview. It's marvelous.
Yeah, you know, some of them are just so.
Yeah, special.
Like Joyce Brothers putting on her makeup and curling her hair while you were interviewing her.
I never forgave her for that.
We were on the air, and she was going to a TV station the next time, and she just didn't get up early enough. And so Charlie's doing the interview, we're on the air, and she is putting her makeup on, and this guy is fixing her hair, sitting at the console.
Yeah, Polly Bergen took a nap between commercials.
Yeah.
But you get all kinds of... I could tell you a few stories, but
Yeah.
I'll save those for my book. Yes.
I have a question. What I do is a little different because I do fiction, but a lot of the coaching use is nonfiction. Because my book is day rate. And one of the problems I have is people think automatically it's a depressing subject, but it's not because of the coaching. Any ideas on how to get past the idea that somebody has that, you know, an automatic turn on for something saying, oh no, that would be depressing?
I missed the subject.
Day rate?
Yeah, yeah, that is that. I don't
Certainly
think
topical.
Yeah, it's topical, and that would be the first thing. The mark that you would have against you would be it's fiction. It's very hard to get a fiction book on the air.
Today.
Yes.
today's climate.
Yeah, we used to do it a long
to do a
time
lot of
ago, but
fiction.
now it's topical. News of the day, headlines, stuff.
That's too bad.
Your book, though, since it's based on date rape, and if you come
You're an
in
expert.
with
I mean,
this,
supposedly.
yeah, with this
I mean, we're looking at it from
information.
that.
We wouldn't so much as have you on to talk about your book. We would have you on to talk about the issue of date rape.
Right.
So, and by the way, this is da-da-da, author of.
Yeah, and I do have a book. I mean, that's
Yes,
the issue.
but it wouldn't be so much the conversation around or on your book itself. You would be the expert. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, after one person who said, well, one day it's based on an experience, and now was the process of coming out of the closet was a topic that in several cases has been, yeah, that is helped,
Yeah.
to really take the focus off of
remember, if you've made yourself an expert on whatever you have written about, whatever it is in that area.
You've got a story
And-
to tell.
And the other thing, too, is not so much, we were talking about this on the way over, is sometimes the authors are such personalities in their own
Yeah.
right.
With or without a book.
Yeah, they're just a good interview. They're just a good interview that, you know, by the way, Joe Smo has written a book, but boy, aren't we having fun.
Yeah.
It just cooks.
Yep.
I want to know what you think about publications like Radio, TV, Interview Report. They're always pitching us to buy ads, and then your ad is placed next to it. Interview the man who walked across America on no legs, you know, that
No,
kind of
we do. Yeah, we really do. Yeah. They're sent out to us free, and all the producers get them. And, you know, the good news, bad news. I'm not real wild about all talk and talk radio. But publications like that, we need because we've got so much time to fill. We don't play music at CCO radio anymore, and suddenly we got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if we're not carrying a game, then we've got to have a guest on the air and just stop and think about it. That's a lot of time to fill. And we use that. We really do. I've had quite a few people ask me about that. And every time I got a copy, I'd page through it and I'd rip the pages off, and I would just say, you know, John Williams, Steve Cannon, Charlie Boone, Ruth, you know, and I just write the names on it and then just pass them out and hand them to the people. I just knew, you know, that the topics were to fit the personality. Yeah.
But wouldn't it be difficult then for someone that that you acquired through radio, TV, interview report, let's say they're an author from Kentucky or something, how does a person from Kentucky do quality research on the personality of WCCO radio, the personality of Charlie Lee? Do they call you and say, hey, I don't know anything about your market?
Oh, no, see, first of all, I'm calling them. Oh, yeah. If I initiate the phone call, I don't expect them to know about the station. I would explain who we are. And, I mean, Lord knows, we've, you know, 75%, oh, even more than that, I bet 90% of the calls or the interviews that we have are initiated by us.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's something that we see or read. You know, you may be getting around to letting us know that you're out there, but maybe,
That's why the Rolodex card that Sue
Yeah.
mentioned, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a great idea. Because we're always looking for experts, and so often you'll
Yeah.
notice even on national public, on the McNeil Lair, or now Lair show, Jim Lair show, or they always have the same guests, it seems. Always the same experts. It's because they're accessible. They know them, they trust them.
tried and true.
And tried and true, and that often happens on radio and in our experience, that it's important for you, all as experts, many of you, let us know
Yeah.
what your expertise is so that we can immediately go to that Rolodex
Yeah.
file and call.
We may not use you now, but you never know. You'll go into the computer database and we'll put you under the, you know, the particular line that you should be and pull you up then. Yes?
Yes, gentleman in the back.
I have a book for you.
It sounds like a good one. See, I love history. I was saying that,
Yeah.
that sounds like
My
a good one.
broadcaster's license expired in 1981, but I had it shrunk up and laminated, and nobody could read the expiration date.
I didn't know you had to have one.
Well, this is something, it's all...
I've been operating without a license.
My question is that I've gone to quite a few events, museums, book signings, things like that, and the format that seems to work the best is that I open myself up to questions for people who are out there. And I'm really amazed at the knowledge that people that come into a bookstore, for instance, would have about this particular subject. And the interaction seems to work really well. Is that format used a lot with radio stations around the country?
With listeners asking questions of the
Yeah,
guests?
the listeners asking
Sometimes.
questions as opposed to the interviewer?
It depends really on
The
the
host.
host's
Yeah.
interest in a book. Sometimes the host is so overwhelmed and in love with the book so much that at the beginning of the
He wants to
show,
hog it. He doesn't want any-
Yeah, he'll even say, "I don't know if we're going to take very many calls today because I've got so many of my own questions," and it'll go that way. Other times, well, and even sometimes then, the calls will come in unasked for.
Depends on the subject and
Yeah.
the calls that come in. If some terrific calls come in, questions that are screened by the producer, and they come on our screen, and boy, there's a great question, we'll put them on.
Yeah.
That often happens.
Because all of the calls are screened, and so we know what they want to ask, or maybe they want to add a comment or something like that. And we've got the computer screen, so we just flash this notice right in front of the talent's face. And sometimes it's pretty hard to ignore.
Yeah.
I generally have somebody in the audience who's real anxious to jump on me about something.
Yeah.
You know, it's writing about Custer, sometimes I feel like I'm trying to rehabilitate Adolf Hitler or something.
That's right.
Some of the public perceptions and
Yeah.
stuff, but I've learned how to handle that really well. And I guess the controversy that comes out, the debate on various issues, and to hold people's interest. I went for 3 hours when I was scheduled for 1 hour for book signing just because nobody knows.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I want to cut to the chase with 2 questions.
you cut to the chase.
Sue, you say you have left now as producer for these shows. Who is attempting to fill your shoes?
Well, the last assignment that I had was on the Good Morning Show. And the person there is Pat Swift. It's a he, Pat Swift. Well, I've been honored to work with everyone at the station, a lot of great people. And like I said, when I started working with Boone and Erickson, it was just the thrill of a life. And then following the Boone and Erickson show, there was a Charlie Boone show. And so that's where we did a lot of books.
Did a lot of books
Boy,
during
we
that period
did.
of time,
Oh,
some
we-
years ago, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was really fun.
Yeah, I enjoy books, so,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're right in a row.
I called, when it comes through, to you, does that come directly to you then, or do you, how do you say it's screened?
It comes directly to the producer.
Oh, we're talking about like listener call-ins when a show is done? That comes into the producer. The producers answer the phone. And there's a whole lingo. I'm probably the toughest call screener there. I was. Say, what is your first name and where are you calling from? Some talent even wanted us to find the age, and obviously male, female, we could generally tell that. What's your question or comment? And you'd say, I want to talk about Custer. Well, what in particular do you want to say about Custer?
She's tough.
Yeah, I got real, because one of the reasons was that I didn't want a whole bunch of the same calls. I wanted something that was a good question or a good comment that would excite our other listeners. I don't want to bore the listeners. You know, I'm not going to let every call that comes through. I would say maybe 50% of the calls, I'd say, thanks so much for calling, but we'll move on. We won't take your call today. So I didn't always take every call, by any means.
Yes, you had a question back there?
Yeah, does fax or mail, does one carry more weight than the other? Does the fax have any more urgency?
Not really. The fax is probably read sooner, only because we don't have to open the envelope to get it out.
Yeah, that's right. And generally,
There's
it's
just so
it's
much
one page.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes an envelope, you get a
Yeah.
whole bunch of stuff, a volume of stuff.
You know, and then just to follow up, even in your fax note, to say, I'll be sending you the full news kit and the book within a couple of days, but here's just a little gist of what's going on, especially if you're on a timeline. If you've got, you know, maybe you're doing a tour, or you've got a speaking engagement coming up, or a book signing or something, and you've got a little window of opportunity there that you want to get on.
You want the fax number?
At the station?
Is there a resource in the United States for radio stations that would list a large number of fax numbers?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know.
Well, the broadcaster's yearbook generally has a fax number. I will not guarantee that it is current, but that now,
Or you could call that station number and find their fax number. They give you their...
yeah,
Because we have many faxes at the station. Some are for news, some for sales,
yeah.
some for program.
And one of the mistakes, especially at a station the size of CCO, where we have 6 producers with a bunch of different shows, is don't just assume that you send to one producer and it's going to go shotgun to the other producers. I usually would look at my stuff and say, Not for the morning show, probably John Williams, you know, and I'd give it off to the John Williams producer. But not everyone does that. So if you're going to send something, send it in duplicate. You're going to have to send it to all the people. And I know that it gets expensive, but...
Or tell them, say, if you can't
Yeah.
use this, send it on to the next person. or
Yeah,
someone else.
but a station the size of CCO Radio with the power of it, that's a pretty inexpensive investment when you think of, if you can get 5 minutes on the air, what does a commercial minute go for at CCO?
Well, in the morning, it's about $500.
Yeah, you know, so if you could get 5-10 minutes on the air, it's a pretty good investment.
Yes.
Most of our marketing is done to radio stations, and we've done about 600 interviews now. And the way we reach stations is by fax. Every Friday we send out faxes to like 400 stations, and we do this weekly. And we try to vary it every week, and we've got feature a different book and a different angle and this and that. At what point does it become too much? Like not another one for them.
Yours are always creative, you know, and it's very easy to look at it, and if I think, oh, we can't use this, or, you know, it just doesn't, we get a lot of stuff that we're not going to use. I mean, I just put it in recycling, you know, it just goes down the recycling bin. I don't think it becomes too much. What would become too much is if you get a ton of phone calls. But I think it's easier with paper, you know,
But
just to look at
persistency
it.
does pay off.
Yeah, it does. You wear us down after a
Because one
while.
day you may not be ready for that interview, but maybe a week later you might say, hey, there was a story, or it might be just
Yeah,
the thing you're
you
looking
got to
for.
keep reminding us.
Yeah.
Like the golf, golf and the tundra. And that fax happened to come to me in our first cold, really cold weather. And, yeah, right. And I picked it up off the machine, and I don't even know if it came to me. I just saw it on the fax machine, the programming fax. I picked it up, and it's, ooh, yeah, fun, it's cold. We're thinking about snow. This would be a fun thing to do. And we had it on the Good Morning show, I think I did in the Good Morning. And you guys did the duct tape book
Yes.
on the Boone and Erickson
Yes,
show. Yeah.
yeah. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not on every day anymore. I'm on Saturday morning, 6 to 10, and we don't have as much time on the Saturday morning show for interviews with book guests as we had previously. But once in a while, depending upon the subject. And yes.
Something Sue said just a minute ago is something I've always wondered. You said the thing that gets bad is all the phone calls. And I get kind of a mixed message when not necessarily from you, but I read things and they say, you send the press release and then a week later you call them. And then you call them again, and then you call them again. And to me, that's called making a nuisance out of yourself. But I have read in so many things that this is what you have to do to get noticed.
No, in fact, I redid my voicemail a couple of different times at CCO, and it was almost to the point is, don't call me, I'll call you. If there is something that I want, I will jump right on top of that and I'll call. So you give me a paper copy of it. I think the most irritating thing that any producer or talent gets is a call without any information. We can't make an informed judgment and do anything without something in front of us, unless it's someone that we know and we've worked with a lot before. But give me a piece of paper, something, a letter or a background piece of paper. And if it's something I really, really like, I'll call right away.
Suppose you had a voicemail that said, hey, I sent you a fax, haven't heard from you. My number is so on in case you lost it. And just that.
And that's fine.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
please?
But if you don't hear from me,
Don?
sorry.
Yeah, Sue, earlier you mentioned 90% of your material being initiated by you, and you talked about a database. How does one get on that database? And how often do you really use that database?
The one that we had at CCO Radio was, it's called the BASIS system, and it's just a Rolodex, basically, on computer. And we would put the topic in, and then the experts that we had for that topic underneath with phone numbers and a date when it was entered in, or maybe a date when the person was a guest on the show, and have that in the computer. So that if, say I use someone on medical ethics, and then 3 months from now, someone wanted. They could go into that and they'd say, oh, well, 3 months ago, they could even come to me and check and say, well, how was that person? Pretty good? You know, because we don't do any grading. Some people even go so far as to put little grades by how good the guest was and all of that. The way to get in is, again, and we're really talking topics and issues, is to send that piece of paper, that fax, or the snail mail, and internet too. God, I forgot about that. I'm just learning how to do the internet. But that's a whole other thing too now, that you can send the information on. But send that and say, if you're ever looking for an expert guest on, here I am, or here he is, or she is, and this is the reason. And and give me some bullet points, and just 1 page if you can do it. Now, if it's something that is the topic of the day, you know, then you probably want to follow it up with a phone call. But again, if you don't get a call back, we're probably already got someone who's not interested.
Yeah, I would just like to know, we do press releases and background information. We send them mostly. Sometimes we fax them, and we do research pretty thoroughly the shows to make sure that we're sending it to highly relevant producers. But we always have them request the book if they're interested. We send a handful of books to the ones who we think would be most interested, but we get a lot of request calls from producers, and does that work okay, or do you really prefer, I mean, we blitz nationally, and so to send books nationally to those contacts, we'd rather prefer that you decide if it's going to work or not before we send the book to you, unless we know for sure, or if we've worked with you before and we know absolutely without a doubt this is something we know that you need to see. Otherwise, we'll just have a call. Is that something that...
Well, if you're doing the mass mailing, and I mean, you're sending it that broad, as long as you have a detailed, comprehensive news kit, some bullet items, some highlights from the book, it has to be a little more comprehensive. And that would probably work. And as you said, you know the people that like to get the books, then that really covers it right there.
To them too, if we know that it's specifically an outdoor show producer and this is the perfect book for them, but is it preference, or is it pretty much all across the board that you guys absolutely like to receive books immediately? Or do we lose out because you read it and say, oh, I'm interested, and you're on to the next thing, like, you know, a day later, and then it kind of shuffles away, and then you're...
No, because the book is real hard to lose. You know, if the book is sitting there, I can't tell you how many times that... In fact, one time I was... embarrassed to say this, but you get so busy. I found a clipping in a magazine, and I said, this would be perfect, John Williams. And I brought it in, and I was sitting down finding the publisher's name and going through the Rolodex to find the phone number, to track down the contact, and as I turned around to grab something, there the book and the news kit is sitting on my floor. I mean, I had received it and not even realized it. But like I said,
you get so much material.
Yeah, but I said, there it was. The book was there. And all of a sudden, I thought, oh, great, good. This is what I want. And all the magazine article did was reinforce my, you know, the producers just read and read and read, and we listen and we watch, and we're getting things from all over the place, you know.
I know we don't have much time. There's one word that I know people on the Arrow use. Does it have a hook?
Mm-hmm.
And they're always looking for a story or a hook, something that they can hook on this book or this story you want to tell.
Yep.
And that's what they look for. And if you can provide the radio station, either the personality or the producer, with a hook, 9 times out of 10, I'll bet you're in.
You have to be just as informed in the news of the day as a producer is. You know, so how can your book be worked in? Yes.
If Charlie writes that wonderful book of experiences that he's talking about, do you think WCCO will give him an interview?
I think we probably would, yeah. We were just talking about Dick Chapman, who some of you may know was in our news department for years and years and years, and he has just written a book and self-published it, and he was on, was it 2 weeks ago?
Last Monday and a week ago.
Yeah.
and also last Saturday with
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
And I keep forgetting the title. It is.
Dick Chapman's When CCO Was Cookin' book.
Yeah.
It's about when Dick worked at the station and during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And that was the time when Dick felt, when he was there, when things were cooking. And obviously talks about Cedric Adams and Howard Viken, Jurgen Nash, Joyce Lamont, Randy Merriman, and Boone and Erickson, and a few others. But that's and his viewpoint, seen through the eyes of Dick Chapman, of course. But it's a very breezy, chatty book, and it's kind of fun.
Do we have any? We're here. We're gonna have any?
What do you have every day? You have email, you have voicemail, or you have mail. What gets first attention? What gets no attention?
Well, the voicemail gets the first attention, but
Yeah,
there's no guarantee that I'll call back. Of course, you don't get that. I guess the fax would be next.
Email will probably be down at the bottom because
Yeah.
not as many people get to it
We're
immediately.
we're not quite as into that
If you're busy, you don't
yet.
get to it.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't checked my email for a week, and I'm sure I have some messages there. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
What's that? That's where it is.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Sue.
you, sir.
You're terrific. Everybody, that's our program this evening, and good night. Thank you so much.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.